Good afternoon, and welcome to this special session on cloud security and atmosphere, which I understand is being watched by thousands of people all around the world. You're going to want to stay to the very end of this session because we have a few surprises, and we're only going to announce them at the end. Before we start, remember that you can ask questions through the chat window directly below the video screen. Googlers will be on hand to answer your questions. At last count, there was at least 1 exabyte of data in the cloud. That's the equivalent of 20 billion 4-drawer filing cabinets full of paper. Or as one source put it, 52,000 tons of pepperoni pizza. That's a lot of pizza. And that's cloud-based data, ranges from sales records, healthcare information, to other business critical information. So it's clear that the cloud and its collaboration benefits are already here to stay. Yet businesses of all sizes remain still hesitant. And they're driven by this nagging perception that cloud is somehow less secure than on-premise systems. Even according to a global survey by the Cloud Security Alliance, 73% of security, IT, and business leaders concerned say their number one concern is about the security of data in the cloud is holding them back from cloud adoption. Well, today we're here to declare the unmistakable truth that the cloud is probably one of the most secure places you can keep your data. And that's because Google and other large cloud providers have this concentrated security expertise. And they've created these economies of scale in security that very few companies can really match. We originally built this to protect our own operations, but now businesses around the world are benefiting from our investments. And that's really critical. Because if we learned anything from the string of security breaches in 2014, it's that the risks are growing. The thieves are getting even smarter. And on-premise systems are simply not strong enough or sophisticated enough to combat and protect people against these threats. To address this and so much more, we've gathered a panel of cloud innovators from both the public and private sector. Joining us from today, from various parts of the world, we have 4 great panelists. First, we have Rod Drury from Xero, all the way from New Zealand. And Xero is one of the fastest growing cloud-based accounting platforms. They're used by over 475,000 small businesses in more than 180 countries. Talk about some sensitive information. Basically, think of them as the QuickBooks in the cloud. We also have Chris Botello from Fossil, joining from Dallas, Texas. For those of you that don't know, Fossil is the maker of iconic watches for brands like Fossil, Diesel, Burberry, Emporio Armani, DKNY. And Fossil is using the cloud to connect 14,000 employees in 400 retail locations, plus all the people in the 4,000 wholesale locations. And then we also have Brandon Williams from the state of Colorado, where they have over 30,000 civil servants using Google Apps on a daily basis, basically to run the state. We'll hear from our panel in one moment, but first, it's my pleasure to introduce Neil Provost. Neil's a distinguished engineer at Google. He's been driving Google Cloud Security Initiative for years. Over the next 10 minutes, he'll offer some insight into the way we think about security at Google and some of the threats that we're all facing that spur Google to even make greater investments in securing the entire internet.
Thank you, Aaron. Before I get started, let's talk about some sobering thoughts. There's almost no week where we don't read about in the newspapers about yet another company being compromised, or they lose sensitive user data or their intellectual property. Unfortunately, the people behind these attacks are very sophisticated. In fact, it's safe for us to assume the highest level of sophistication. When we think about our adversaries, we think about nation-states like the Five Eyes. In light of such a threat environment, there are only a very few companies who can keep up. Google is one of them. To Google, it's critical that the people trust the internet and Google itself. That is because Google is dependent on the web, and we need people to trust the web. If it was not trusted, innovation and adoption of our technology would surely slow down. That's why we protect over 1 billion users with safe browsing technologies in Chrome, Safari, and Firefox. And that's why we share what we learn about security threats with the wider community. That's also why we continue to invest heavily into making Google and the internet more secure. In the next 10 minutes, I will explain why security at large is important to Google. I will start by outlining our approach to security in general, and then I will give you some details on the threats that we are seeing. So first of all, how do we manage to make Google secure? We need to start with the people. We try to hire the best and brightest from academia and security, and today the core security and privacy team consists of about 500 people. The people are really our greatest assets, and it is what we need to create security. However, while our people are a great foundation, there are three other important aspects of our approach I would like to talk about. One is our good engineering practices, our good security infrastructure, and finally, our novel approaches to solving security problems. Let's start with the good engineering practices. At Google, every system needs to undergo a security design review. The goal of this review is to make sure that systems are being built with security in mind, so that they're built with security from the very ground up. Security is not shoehorned in the last minute. Another very important practice is code reviews. That means that we have a peer with a second pair of eyes looking at all code that is being written to find bugs and security problems. We also engage in extensive testing practices where we have automated tests that run all the time to make sure that no new bugs are being introduced as code is being written. We have also heavily invested in frameworks that make it easier to write code correctly. One example is a frequent vulnerability in web applications that we call cross-site scripting. In cross-site scripting, malicious input can appear in the trusted output of an application, and that basically means that a malicious script may run in a web application and steal your sensitive information. In order to prevent this, we have built auto-escaping frameworks that make it so that the code will automatically correctly sanitize input, so that there's no case where input can lead to malicious script execution. These good engineering practices result in quality software. For example, in 2008, we would not have been able to introduce auto updates on Chrome without quality engineering. And without quality engineering, it would have not been auto updates would not have become the best practice it is today, where even operating systems such as Apple macOS 10 will auto update for security problems. In addition to good engineering practices, good security infrastructure is important too. And I will just give you one example of a novel approach that we have pioneered at Google. This is something that we call Beyond Corp. Beyond Corp basically says that firewalls do not matter, that firewalls do not provide you with the security you think they do. And let's take one example. Your firewall protects sensitive resources, and only people within your corporation, within that firewall, can get access to these resources. Now imagine a user, when they go home at night, they take their laptop with them, they get that laptop infected with malware, and then bring it back to work the next day. So now you have the malware running in your corporation, within your firewall, with access to your sensitive resources. In Beyond Corp, we say the location of a machine does not matter, but what matters is the security state of the machine and the identity of the user. That means if we do not think that your machine is patched to the latest patch level or is uncompromised, we will not give you access. So let's say you had a user who by itself should get access to information, if we believe that the machine is not secure, maybe because we haven't seen it in a while, or because it's not patched, or because we believe it is compromised, that user would not get access to the resources. Beyond Corp is really a new paradigm that has been very successful at Google. Let's talk about novel approaches to security. One such approach is Project Zero. The goal of Project Zero is to raise the bar in finding vulnerabilities in popular software all over the internet. Project Zero finds bugs that are not publicly known yet. That is what we call Zero Day. And the goal is to improve the state of software security, to make it much more difficult for the bad guys to find new vulnerabilities to exploit. Make it much more difficult because we will have found those vulnerabilities before they do. In order to do so, we leverage Google's massive computation power to fuzz binaries. And by fuzzing binaries, I mean we generate lots of random inputs till we find an input that will crash the program. Let's take a PDF reader, for example. We have crawled the internet for millions of PDFs, and we will randomly change these PDFs and feed them as input into this PDF reader till the PDF reader crashes. Every crash is basically a new security vulnerability that we have found. Our fuzzing efforts have resulted in finding lots of critical security flaws in many different products, for example, Adobe Flash Player or Acrobat Reader. However, fuzzing is not a panacea, and the team also makes use of intensive source code reviews to identify security problems. So now that we have found these problems or vulnerabilities, how do we get them fixed? And this is where Project Zero's disclosure policy comes into play. The moment that we find a vulnerability, a 90-day clock starts ticking, and when the 90 days are over, this vulnerability will be made public. Clearly, these timelines are somewhat tricky, and while 90 days is the default, we have some flexibility depending on the circumstances, but not a lot. Our statistics speak for themselves, though. 85% and more of the bugs are actually fixed within that deadline, and that sort of is a good indication that we have struck the right balance for how long this should take. Even with the top-notch security team, clearly we cannot find all security problems ourselves. And that is where vulnerability rewards come into play. This is an effort in which we leverage security researchers across the world to help us find vulnerabilities in our own products. We not only offer fame, we also offer financial rewards. In 2014 alone, we paid out more than $1.5 million to over 200 researchers. And vulnerability rewards have helped us make more secure products for our users. Let me transition over to explain some threats, some of the threats that we face every day. And I will give 3 examples. One is denial of service attacks, the other one is malicious code, and then I will also talk about pervasive eavesdropping. Due to Google's infrastructure and massive scale, we're actually in a unique position to respond to these threats. Let's take distributed denial of service attacks as an example. You may have recently read in the news about the Great Cannon attack, in which millions of users had malicious JavaScript injected into the HTML and JavaScript pages that they visited. As a result, their browsers then participated in a large-scale attack against the Great Fire website and took it down. From Google's perspective, our massive scale allows us to sync large DDoS attacks without impacting our regular users. And in fact, we regularly deal with DDoS attacks of over 300 gigabits per second. That is a lot of traffic, and we can do this without negatively impacting our users. Another example is malicious workloads. Google's cloud allows everybody to run arbitrary code. So it's safe for us to assume that all of this code, in fact, is malicious. And then the question becomes, how can the malicious code here run in a way that it doesn't affect all the benign workloads that are running everybody else? And in order to do this, we leverage virtual machines. We use virtual machines as an isolation boundary that ensures that the malicious code cannot escape from this virtual machine and that it does not impact workloads over here. The technology that we use for that is called KVM, and so it's critically important for us to find all vulnerabilities in KVM so that it's really a secure piece of software. And our track record sort of speaks for itself. Of the 17 publicly announced KVM vulnerabilities, Google's cloud security team found 14 of them. That is really quite a feat. When we look at users, they also have to worry about malicious code. And that's why we try to protect our users and their trust in the internet with a technology that we call safe browsing. Safe browsing protects over 1.1 billion users from phishing and malware in Chrome, Safari, and Firefox. We also make this data available as an API to everyone for free. Most recently, we expanded the protection that safe browsing affords to something that we call unwanted software. In unwanted software, you often find some useful piece of software bundled with other functionality that can be very deceptive and change your preferences, such as your search engine, or display annoying pop-up ads, or in general, just make your computer very unusable. To protect users from this and make their experience on the internet safer, we published our unwanted software policy last year, and we are now enforcing it across search, ads, and Chrome, all with the goal of having the experience for our users on the internet be a safe one. Let's talk about pervasive eavesdropping. As you may know, this is a problem that impacts everybody on the internet. To deal with it, we are encouraging encryption of all web traffic. In order to securely encrypt, it is important that your web browser can correctly identify the web server that it is talking to. This requires something called a certificate, and these certificates are being issued by a large number of third-party organizations that are trusted by your browser. While encryption is very important, unfortunately, the certificate infrastructure has significant problems. We have seen lots of examples of fraudulently issued certificates. For example, Google found out that the DigiNota certificate authority was compromised, and this resulted in Iran issuing certificates against Gmail, which allowed them to launch man-in-the-middle attacks against their users. Another more recent example is the Chinese CNNIC, which issued an intermediary certificate to Egypt, that was then being used to create fraudulent certificates against Google domains. In Chrome, we can protect our users against these threats by something that we call certificate pinning. In certificate pinning, Chrome will show a warning anytime it encounters a certificate for a Google domain where the certificate was not being issued by Google. This basically means that Chrome users are not impacted by fraudulent certificates. But what do we do for users of other browsers? And this is where a project that we call certificate transparency comes into play. With certificate transparency, we create public logs of all issued certificates. So if you're a webmaster running your own web domain, you can now check these public logs for any certificates that you did not create yourself. This allows you to find instances where other entities are fraudulently issuing certificates against your web domains. This is just one example of transparency. In general, transparency is very important. So let me talk a little bit more about it. Transparency is the way in which we can prove that we can be trusted. For example, we were very open when we were compromised during the Aurora incidents. When we noticed that DigiNota was compromised and issuing fraudulent certificates, we notified the public about this. We published a safe browsing transparency report that states how phishing and malware attacks are currently happening on the internet. We also published a safer email transparency report that shows what percentage of email as it is being transferred between mail providers is being encrypted. In general, our persistent effort to be transparent allows us to positively influence the adoption of best practices. Just a few days after we released the Safer Email Transparency Report, both Comcast and Apple started encrypting their email. I hope this illustrates the importance of transparency, and we plan on being strong proponents of transparency in the future. So this concludes my talk. Thank you very much. I hope you learned something new about the different approaches that Google takes to security, how we keep Google itself secure, and how we protect our users on the internet at large. Thank you.
Thanks, Niels. It's not every day that Google top security executives share this information to the public. So it's really interesting to understand some of the technology that secures all of our online collaboration. But let's now hear from those that use this technology and how it affects their online security. Stealth IT or shadow IT has become one of the big buzzwords. And for those that aren't familiar with what shadow IT is, it's basically where employees or even entire departments are going and getting their own technology solutions without the approval or even knowledge of IT. What does this look like inside your organizations? What kind of challenges does this pose from a security standpoint? And can you share some real-life stories and some brief description of how it impacted the organization? Let's go with you, Chris.
Sure. So what shadow IT looks like for us today is very different from what it looked like before we transitioned to Google Apps. In the past, we had business units procuring point solutions because IT really wasn't providing them with relevant, up-to-date business tools. Our users were clamoring for more modern, intuitive ways to collaborate, like what they had really come to expect from their personal lives. They weren't necessarily choosing bad solutions, but we didn't have a way to ensure proper data governance. After transitioning to Google Apps, we've seen a shift in shadow IT in three important ways. First, we're now providing tools that enhance collaboration that previously really could only be found in the shadows. Second, we have more insight into what's connected to our collaboration environment through our Google Apps admin console. This gives us more insight into the user's appetite for different tools. Finally, through providing new relevant tools, our users are actually more actively engaging with us and partnering to find new solutions. A great example of this is a cloud-based project management solution that was highlighted by several business users, and then we went on to implement.
Interesting to hear what starts as a security issue ends up delivering more collaboration. Brandon, how did you end up responding to the push of shadow IT?
Yeah, shadow IT is one of our more powerful resources, but they certainly bring some security challenges. Google Apps actually gives us the ability to manage those challenges and tap into their creative and resourceful power. For example, when we ran a report in Google Apps to identify all of the third-party apps installed using our state accounts, we found that there were 1,800 applications. We took that list to our security office, and they immediately reacted with a desire to shut down all access. However, when we looked at it, we saw it for what it is. It was a report card on our IT efforts. Shadow IT had found these applications to solve challenges because we didn't. As a result, we actually took the opportunity to formalize shadow IT. We identified them, we organized them, we helped improve the idea sharing between us and them. We created a security and functionality vetting system that we were then able to permit the use of these applications through a private Chrome store. That provided us an opportunity to provide a safe, secure environment where users could identify the applications, we could vet them, and we could authorize them. This is helping us to manage that security, identifying those apps, but ultimately allowing us to get the tools to the users, particularly those ones that they really need.
Rod, you probably have a very innovative and demanding workforce. How did this play out for you?
It's a balancing act. We encourage our teams to find great new tools, but that we also need to make sure that our operations stay secure. When you're holding a business's financial data, you'd really have to strike that balance. So we have our security team review each new tool and often sandbox a pilot if there looks to be a business benefit. We always look for enterprise-grade login processes and the data that those tools ask for.
So you guys all seem to describe how users drive the adoption of the cloud and its tremendous benefits, like the economies of scale around better collaboration. But how does the rise of the cloud impact your security expectations?
Well, we make watches. We're not a technology company. So buying iris scanners didn't quite make the cut on our data center wish list. Our expectations for cloud security is that it would at minimum be as safe as on-premise and would offer much more advanced security. Much like several years ago when we moved our own data centers to a colo facility to take advantage of their economies of scale, moving apps to a cloud provider has given us capabilities that we really couldn't develop on our own. These new expectations include enhanced physical security, because rumor has it Google does have iris scanners, to auditing and just dealing with the sheer mechanics of securely moving data around the globe. Cloud technologies have set a new expectation that are really difficult to match on-premise in many cases. As you can imagine, as a retailer, security is an incredibly important subject for us, and we have a great CISO who's completely on board with cloud security and all the advantages it offers.
Yeah, so Google has not only iris scanners, but we actually even have under-the-floor laser beams in its data centers. Right? Rod, you're a professional cloud provider as well. What's your perspective on this?
The reality is that we wouldn't be the business we are and the biggest disruptor in our industry without the cloud. You know, we run 625 servers, banking grade, security, and getting close to 500,000 small business as customers. And so we were able to build this company across a highly fragmented market because the cloud has dramatically reduced the cost of distribution, and we can now provide a secure solution, you know, all across the world. And we do run it all from a small set of rocks in the South Pacific. But what I would add is that we look at security not just in terms of access, but in terms of service. And this is something that's really in the hearts and minds of all New Zealanders. 4 years ago, we had a major earthquake in one of our largest cities, and it killed over 100 people. And the follow-on from that huge event was the economic catastrophe which took place afterwards. We had businesses with on-premise data storage that couldn't get in their buildings for 6 months. Some of them just they went out of business. For our customers, the ones that were on the cloud, had their documents in the cloud, their finances in the cloud, they just simply moved to a new location, logged on, and it was business as usual.
That's really interesting about how the earthquake impacted the on-premise. Brandon, you operate in a very conservative environment. How is security of the cloud perceived in your world?
Yeah, you know, the rise of the cloud has enhanced our security in many ways beyond what we had with our prior systems. I think the biggest challenge from a security perspective really isn't a technical one. It's more of a cultural one. You know, understanding sharing protocols, how documents are stored in the cloud, and how collaboration is achieved at the same time that security is enhanced is a tough message for long-term government employees. You know, they've been used to doing business in traditional ways. So we adjusted our apps training to include specific discussions around security, ensuring their users that these systems meet applicable government standards, and then showed them the tools that they can use to actually increase their comfort levels, to look at revision histories, track access using activity streams, and to get a broader understanding of how the cloud actually works, both from a collaboration standpoint as well as a security standpoint.
You just gave me another reason I want to move to Colorado. A reminder to the audience that you can ask all your questions in the chat window below this video screen. So how does this combination of security and collaboration affect your thoughts about where you see your data going, let's say over the next 5 years? How will people use it then?
We absolutely see this taking place. You know, I'm pretty sure we can all agree the old model of connecting to VPN, finding an email with the newest revision, and then downloading the file had to go. While it was secure, it often created too high a barrier for effective collaboration. As we transition to Google Apps, we see that collaboration via email is lowered, and these interactions have moved more to chat on Hangouts or just flat out working in the document together. It's truly become frictionless to collaborate anywhere and anytime. As a personal example, I went on a world tour in January of 2014 to educate our business partners on our Google transition. And in the past, this would have required me to lug my laptop around, but instead I was able to work completely off my tablet, securely pulling files from the cloud wherever I was, be it Hong Kong, Switzerland, London, or at an offsite meeting down the street. We really couldn't have imagined that a year ago we'd be using Google Drive to facilitate floor sets in our stores with photos and documents being updated in real time.
Incidentally, you can travel to all these places without taking your files with you, as you saw, right? So even if you lose the device or it gets stolen during your trip, the information remains and it remains secure. Rod, you also have operations all over the world. What's your take on this?
Yes, so we doubled staff to over 1,200 people, over 18 months, 1,200 people now working across 20 offices and often in cross-functional teams. And the truth is, we just don't know where any of our people are really at any given moment. Most of us are traveling constantly. But I love that no matter where you are, a group of us can just jump onto a document or a hangout and get things done. We're a challenger, so we need to move fast. We don't have the time to work in series. We absolutely have our teams working in parallel. For example, just last week we had some news leak come into the media that we would have rather stayed under wraps as a publicly traded company, and one watched very closely here. So we had to get ahead of that story and started working on a blog post. At one point, I was editing a Google Doc in a cab between meetings in Wellington, while other folks are weighing in from the US. So we turned our response around in 15 minutes, and that kind of event probably happens to us 2 or 3 times a week. So when we have a question that is just in someone else's space, we just patch them in, find out what we need and move on. Our speed through collaboration, I think, is one of the things that gives challenger companies a competitive advantage.
Yeah, editing a document while in the back of a taxi is never fun, but it's great that these tools allow you to do so. Brandon, do you have an example of how these tools help serve the public in new ways?
We're true believers. Our aim is to fundamentally change how government works, both to enhance how government works internally, but also how citizens and residents get access to the data that they need. So going to the cloud for us means not just taking current bad practices and making them cloud-based bad practices. On the government side, we want a system that makes our employees' work lives easier. For example, right now our agriculture inspectors drive around from farm to do livestock inspections. In their trucks, they carry binders of historical data. We're working towards an environment where our inspectors can manage their work schedules, can be tracked for safety, and have secure database access geofenced to locations in the field where they're working. Driving directions to a farm. You pull up, you have the historical data and forms loaded onto a tablet. Inspection data in real time. From a citizen perspective, it's really about reinventing government access, designing customer portals that know that you need to have your driver's license renewed. Or, in other cases, if your area has disaster assistance services available during difficult times. Or, professional daycare services that are licensed and in good standing located in your neighborhood. Not by searching and stumbling through awkward government websites, but predictive and inclusive, but most importantly, secure.
I want to thank everyone for sharing your thoughts so candidly. I'm sure this has been a very helpful session to our audience today. I wouldn't want to wrap this up without a couple closing thoughts. And most of all, I want to point you to a couple of resources. And yes, even a giveaway to reward you for your attention. The best one for the end. If you're listening now, you're likely be interested in our recently published security white paper, which summarizes in 26 pages the most relevant security processes and practices used within Google, things that we use to protect our infrastructure. You can find there things like how our security teams and privacy teams work, information about our audits, how we react in case of incidents, or how we use your data, or should I say, how we don't use your data, and important topics like how we handle law enforcement requests to access your data. So if you still have any questions about these topics, it's likely that you'll find the answers within these pages. You'll receive this white paper in a follow-up email from us. Second, you may have read we released a security feature that we've been using for a while internally. It's called Password Alert. Password Alert is a new Chrome extension which you install in your browser. It'll remember a partial fingerprint of your Google password starting the next time you sign into your Google account. And then from then on, if you ever use that password to sign in on any other site, for example, a phishing scam, Password Alert will notify your domain admin and suggest that you go reset your password. So go to the Chrome Web Store and download Password Alert. Third, we recently released an even stronger protection than password, and it's based on a physical key. So after using it internally at Google, the security key is a physical USB second factor that works only after verifying the login site is truly a Google website, not a fake site pretending to be Google. But rather than typing in a code or a password, you just insert the security key into your USB slot on your computer and then tap it when prompted to in Chrome. And then rather than sending the password back, it performs a cryptographic signature on the key. This will protect you against phishing attacks and other attempts to steal your login credentials. You can easily get one of these on Amazon, but today is your lucky day, as we're giving the lucky first 250 of you one of these keys. So as soon as I say goodbye, on your screen will appear a form. Answer this simple question. How many security engineers does Google employ today? Add your email address, and the first 250 people to answer correctly will receive a voucher over email for a free key. Thank you so much, and goodbye.